From today, we've decided to live in this house. I'd like to divorce you because you're in the way, but I guess you can stay as a maid," he announced suddenly, bringing home his mistress and their 3 children. Caught off guard by my husband's selfish declaration, I was speechless, my mind frozen in shock. His mistress, a flashy young woman with brightly colored hair, at least 10 years younger than me, giggled mockingly, "Is it really okay to say such things?" To which my husband proudly boasted, "She can't stand up to me, she's practically a slave." Silently, he then placed a hand on my shoulder, "So, I guess you'll be our maid from now on." The mistress smirked at me, saying, "Thanks," with a grin. "If he wants the house, he can have it. I've no reason to endure any longer. No. I will divorce you and leave this house, so please do as you like with it," I told them firmly, facing my husband and his mistress directly. Thinking I was dependent on him, my husband was dumbfounded by my quick agreement to divorce, standing there agape. The idea that I was dependent on him was absurd. On the contrary, letting go of him meant I could finally be free. Afterward, my husband moved the mistress into the house, expecting to drive me out. But that was just the beginning of his nightmare. I am Hannah. I used to live with my husband and our son, a family of 3. Before marrying, I was a busy high school teacher. I met my husband at a social drinking event hosted by a friend. My husband took a liking to me the moment he saw me and persistently asked for my contact information. At that time, I had just broken up with my boyfriend and wasn't interested in dating anyone else, and my husband wasn't my type, so I brushed him off casually. However, due to my husband's insistence, my friends found it amusing and encouraged me to give him a chance. Overwhelmed by peer pressure, I reluctantly exchanged contact information, and from there, under his strong initiative, we started dating. Back then, he was very attentive, planning dates according to my preferences and always putting me first. Initially, I was reluctant, but gradually, I became attracted to him and we started dating. 6 months into our relationship, he proposed. The thought that marrying after just 6 months of dating was too soon crossed my mind, but I thought, he's so kind, it must be okay, and decided to marry him. Soon after our marriage, I found out I was pregnant with our son. My husband wanted me to quit my job and take care of the home, so, after years of teaching, I resigned. Though I loved my job and felt some regrets, thinking of my loving husband and our soon-to-be-born child, I had no regrets. My hometown is a plane ride away from where we live now, and worried about postpartum housework and childcare, I discussed having a homecoming birth with my husband. However, he insisted on helping and suggested we stay at home. Thinking he would help, I decided not to have a homecoming birth. Later, our son was born safely, and child-rearing began. After a week in the hospital, I returned home, excited and anxious about living with my new family, only to find a shocking scene. Clothes were thrown everywhere, the table was littered with leftover takeout and containers, and the kitchen sink was filled with dishes and cups used by my husband over the week. The bathroom was piled high with dirty laundry. The room I had cleaned meticulously before my hospital stay was unrecognizable, as if a burglar had ransacked it. Standing there holding my son, my husband emerged from the back room and greeted me with a smile, "Welcome back. Since you've had a week to rest, make sure you work hard now." I thought he was joking when I looked at my husband, but he just tilted his head with a smile. What a situation. I held my head in despair. Before giving birth, I had quit my job and was doing all the housework since my husband was busy with work, and I thought that was okay. But I expected him to take care of the household duties himself while I was away. My husband is an adult. Frustrated by his completely unapologetic demeanor, I carefully chose my words and reasoned with him. "I've only given birth a week ago, my body isn't fully back, and I haven't had much rest since I was taking care of our baby in the hospital. It's gonna be tough taking care of him, and you said you'd help, which is why I didn't go back to my parents' house, remember?" However, my husband responded, "I'm working, and taking care of the home is your job, right?" Then he added, "I guess I'll take care of him then," and sat on the sofa, turning on the TV. I was stunned by his selfish attitude and couldn't say a word. Moreover, I had to clean up the messy house quickly, or I wouldn't be able to take care of our son. Thinking this, I placed my son in the crib and hurriedly began to clean. My back and belly still hurt, but I pushed through the pain. When my son started crying, I hoped my husband would pick him up and soothe him, but instead, he just called out, "He's crying." That's not what taking care of him means. Getting increasingly irritated from the fatigue, I decided arguing was a waste of time. Holding back my frustration, I demonstrated changing a diaper in front of my husband, saying, "His diaper is wet, I'll show you how to change it." However, my husband never changed our son's diaper after that. Eventually, I managed to clean up our trashed house while carrying my crying son on my back. Meanwhile, my husband had fallen asleep on the sofa, and when he finally woke up in the late afternoon, his first words were, "What's for dinner?" Exhausted, I reluctantly decided to buy some prepared food from the supermarket. Of course, I walked there myself. Carrying my son to the supermarket, I wondered miserably why I was doing this. After all the effort of giving birth, to be treated like this as soon as I got home. It was clear that I couldn't expect any help from my husband going forward. I was already beginning to regret marrying him. Even after that, my husband made no attempt to help with the housework or childcare. He seemed to have taken paternity leave for a week after I was discharged, but he spent it staying up late playing games and then sleeping from morning until noon. On top of that, when our son's nighttime crying kept me awake, he would just say, "He's so loud, make him stop," as if it was nothing. I pleaded with him multiple times to help with the housework and childcare, but he just repeated excuses like, "Housework and childcare are your roles and I'm gonna be working alone when I start my job again, it's the same thing." He wouldn't listen. Exhausted and unable to think clearly due to lack of sleep, I eventually gave up trying to argue. In the end, the paternity leave was in name only, and he did nothing to help. I even thought I'd be better off without a husband at all. During that time, I gave up on expecting anything from my husband. They say postpartum resentment lasts a lifetime, and I really believe it. From then on, as if he didn't exist, I worked hard taking care of our son and doing all the housework. Playing with my little son was fun, but being a first-time mom was tough with so much I didn't know. There were nights when I woke up to deal with his crying, and evenings when I was rushing to prepare dinner and he just wouldn't stop crying no matter what. It's normal for little kids to have days like that. I had to be flexible, so on days like that, I took a nap when my son did or switched dinner to something pre-made. However, one day my husband noticed the house wasn't dirty and snapped, "Did you even clean today? The dinner is so simple. And the main dish, the croquettes, are just store-bought. Don't cut corners." No matter how much I explained that I couldn't keep up with housework because of taking care of our son, he would just say, "You're not working, so you must be free all day," and wouldn't listen. I was fed up with a husband who wouldn't help but was quick to criticize. Furthermore, I noticed that the living allowance he gave me started to decrease once our son began kindergarten. As our son grew, the costs for groceries and daily necessities increased, and there were rising monthly expenses. When I told him this, he insisted that everyone's salaries were going down due to the recession, but he was giving enough and blamed me, saying, "If there's not enough money, it's because you're not managing our finances properly," and accused me of wasting money. Looking down on me coldly, he spat out, "Don't ask for money when you don't work." Being told that, I was left speechless. Reluctantly, I started dipping into my savings from before I was married to cover the monthly shortfalls. As these days continued, my savings quickly diminished, and feeling a sense of crisis, I decided to return to full-time employment as my son started elementary school. Despite the gap in my professional life, I was anxious about finding a job but managed to get hired as a tutor at a learning center, leveraging my background as a former teacher. I was grateful that, considering our son was still young, I was assigned to teach early grades at the elementary school. When I told my husband I was getting a job, he just emphasized, "You're choosing to work, so don't put any burden on me." I took this as a clear sign that he expected me to continue handling all the housework and childcare as before. If I had told him I'm working because the money you provide isn't enough, he would undoubtedly have become enraged, and I couldn't predict what he might do. Besides, I already knew from our past life together that trying to discuss anything with him was pointless. While working full-time and managing the house was challenging, it became manageable as our son grew older and needed less attention. Now that I was working as a full-time employee, I realized that I wouldn't struggle if I divorced my husband. In fact, the thought of being free from stress and only seeing benefits started to frequently cross my mind. However, our son was attached to his father, who only played with him occasionally. My husband was the type to only take part in the fun aspects of parenting, engaging with our son only when he felt like it. Our son enjoyed the rough and tumble play that only a strong man could provide, and he was visibly happy when his father played with him. The thought of taking his father away from him through divorce, and the pain it might cause him, weighed heavily on my heart. So, I couldn't bring myself to go through with a divorce. Time passed, and our son became a high school student. By then, my husband not only stopped contributing financially, but also began staying out late under the pretext of work or being frequently away on business trips. As a teenager, our son, who had been fond of his father during his elementary years, started to express his frustration, saying things like, "Dad's not coming home again today," and seemed fed up when his father was home, doing nothing but sleeping. He also started to resent his father, who was hardly ever home but still criticized his academic performance. For me, since my husband was rarely home when I was awake, I got to spend more time just with my son, and we enjoyed a more comfortable life than before. Our son, perhaps taking his father's lack of involvement as a cautionary tale, became a helpful and sincere young man, voluntarily assisting with household chores without being asked. After studying hard, he managed to get into a national university that he could commute to from home. He spent meaningful years at university and secured a job at a major company, eventually moving out. On the night our son left, I felt a sense of loneliness but also a profound sense of accomplishment for having raised him well on my own. Now, I decided to live freely for myself. With that resolve, I began taking serious steps toward divorcing my husband, which I had put off until now. One holiday, while relaxing in my room, I heard the front door open, my husband's voice, and the sound of several people entering the house. My husband had been away for a while but seemed to have brought someone back with him. Curious, I left my room and saw that my husband had ushered the guests into the living room. As I approached the living room, I encountered a sight I had not expected: a flashy, younger woman by about 10 years, with brightly colored hair, and 3 children ranging from kindergarten to early elementary school age. Stunned by these unexpected visitors, my husband casually introduced the woman and shockingly declared, "I am currently dating her." Why would he boldly bring such a person into our house? While I was reeling, my husband further agitated me by flaunting a divorce paper and saying, "We've decided to live in this house from today. I would like to divorce you since you're in the way, but you can stay on as a maid if you like." His outrageous statement left me speechless. While I stood frozen, my husband and his mistress snickered. "Can you really say that? She's never stood up to me, after all." My husband boasted to his mistress that I was like his slave. He seemed to think my silence was due to fear, that I had given up expecting anything from him and let him do as he pleased, thinking resistance was futile. I had kept quiet for the sake of a peaceful life with our son, holding back my true feelings for his sake, not wanting to expose him to the distress of our arguments. I believed showing conflict would only unsettle our son's mind. Yet, misunderstanding my silence, my anger rose against my husband. He was now proudly telling his mistress that I had been like a dutiful wife, quietly awaiting his return, even when he stopped coming home. His mistress laughed crudely at his words. As I looked at the children sitting carelessly on the sofa, absorbed in their handheld gaming devices, seemingly indifferent to the confrontation among the adults, I asked my husband, "Whose children are these?" As if it were the most natural thing, he bluntly stated they were his and his mistress's children. According to him, he had started the affair with the mistress around the time our son entered high school, and had since fathered 3 children, building a separate family elsewhere. Judging by the children's ages, it seemed the relationship had led to pregnancy almost immediately. The cessation of financial support for our home was probably because of this. Since the living expenses he provided were already insufficient, leading us into debt, I had paid for our son's high school and college expenses entirely from my earnings. My husband surely knew that our son had gone off to college, but he never once brought up the topic of tuition. While I struggled to raise our son, my husband was engrossed with his mistress and their children elsewhere. The fact that he disregarded not just me, but our son as well, made my blood boil. In response to my silence, my husband casually placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Well then, I expect you to serve as a maid from now on." The mistress smirked at me, saying, "Thanks," while giving a mocking laugh. Facing them squarely, I spoke firmly. "No. I am divorcing you and leaving this house. Please do as you wish with it." Thinking I was dependent on him, my husband was stunned when I agreed so readily to the divorce, his mouth agape. I informed them that I would pack my things and leave the house today, then quickly returned to my room. I had been gradually reducing my belongings in preparation for the divorce, so packing was quickly done. I packed only what I needed immediately in a suitcase, organized the rest, and arranged for a moving company to pack and transport the remainder later. After finishing all preparations, I signed the divorce papers without hesitation. My husband had already filled out his part, so I said, "I will be submitting these now," and tucked them into my bag. Surprising him by leaving the same day, I left my puzzled husband and his mistress behind, and headed straight to the lawyer's office where the divorce papers were successfully filed. I lived in a hotel for about a week but soon rented a condo. It wasn't large, but it was enough space for me to live alone. Liberated from my husband, I relished my newfound independence. About a month after the divorce was finalized, I was enjoying a peaceful life when an unexpected call came from my ex-husband. Wondering what he could possibly want now. I hesitated but thought I should answer in case it was something important. Perhaps about our son or the house. Reluctantly, I picked up the phone. The first thing I heard was my ex-husband's desperate cry for help. Regretting picking up the call as soon as I did, I listened as he explained that his mistress's children were completely undisciplined, punching holes in the walls and scribbling all over them in a rampage around the house. Neither my ex-husband nor his mistress could manage any household chores, so the house was a mess, and he was begging me to come and clean. Predictably disgusted by the situation, I sighed in exasperation. Actually, before my ex-husband's mistress and her children moved into our house, they lived in a place where one of my friends also resided. My friend found it strange to frequently see my husband near her place and decided to follow him. She discovered that he was regularly visiting the mistress's place and told me about it. This was when our son was a senior in high school, which means I knew about the mistress and her children before my ex-husband brought them to our house. I had hoped they were not his children, but when he confirmed they were, I was furious. According to my friend, despite being only in elementary school, the mistress's children were notoriously bad, known in the neighborhood for shoplifting and staying out late, having been cautioned by the police more than once or twice. The youngest child, influenced by his older brothers, was already picking up bad habits, screaming foul language and showing violent behavior. Previously, they had been evicted from the house due to noise complaints and bad behavior. Even when child welfare officers visited because the children were left unsupervised, the mistress did nothing. My friend had told me that there were already many complaints about the mistress and her children from her neighbors, and it seemed only a matter of time before they were evicted again. So, when my ex-husband brought the mistress to live with us, I immediately realized they must have been kicked out of their place. I confronted my ex-husband. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" Flustered, he admitted that since it was rented under the mistress's name, he didn't care if it got damaged, and as he usually dated her alone, he hadn't bothered about what the children were doing. Then, realizing I had known all along and kept quiet, he snapped at me, "Why didn't you warn me?" His childish blame-shifting and outburst were just so typical that I was utterly disgusted. Ignoring his ranting complaints, I mentioned I had business at the house, leading him to mistakenly think I was returning for good, and he happily ended the call. 3 days after that call, I visited the house with a lawyer. From the entrance, I could see windows patched with cardboard, torn lace curtains, and a glimpse of the disordered interior through the gaps. Only 2 months had passed since I left, and I was shocked at how rundown it had become as I pressed the intercom. My ex-husband opened the door immediately, retreating in surprise when he saw the male lawyer beside me. Mistaking the lawyer for my new partner, he aggressively asked, "Are you getting remarried or something?" The lawyer stepped between us, calmly introduced himself, and informed my ex-husband that they would be sued for damages. "Damages?" my ex-husband exclaimed in a high-pitched voice, shocked. Hearing this, the mistress hurried out from the back of the house. The lawyer presented the two with documents detailing the amount and specifics of the damages. They snatched the documents as if grabbing them, desperately checking the contents. And then their eyes widened at the sum demanded. After settling into a new place once I was forced out of the house, I thought of claiming damages from my ex-husband, so I consulted a lawyer. After explaining everything, the fact that they had children together, and his neglect of our family during that time, it was clear that a substantial claim for damages was possible. Considering the mental anguish since our son's birth, I felt justified in demanding a significant amount and told the lawyer to get as much as possible. Shocked by the high amount, they were initially speechless, but then my ex-husband pleaded for a reduction, citing repair costs for the house. The house was originally bought on a mortgage for a pre-owned property. Since my husband had stopped contributing to household expenses, I had been paying the mortgage, and there was still a balance remaining. Moreover, considering the house's age, it was about time for renovations, which would be costly. With this in mind, I easily handed over the house to my ex-husband and his mistress. Due to their children's havoc, the house had become quite dilapidated, so I anticipated the repair costs would be significant. When my ex and his mistress came begging for a reduction, I calmly told them, "If you two can't pay, I intend to contact both your parents to cover it. Similarly, if you don't agree to the payment of damages, I will contact each family." Hearing this, they fell silent in despair. The lawyer then prompted my ex-husband to sign the documents regarding the damages, ensuring the payment was secured. Leaving the two heads in hands, we left the house. In the end, they've always had a habit of spending recklessly, so she couldn't come up with the money for her living expenses and asked her parents to help with. Her parents, who are quite strict, were furious upon discovering that their long-estranged daughter had been involved in an affair and had children with her partner. They went to the house where the mistress was living with my ex-husband, scolded both of them, and forcibly took the mistress back to their home. Currently, under her parents' watchful eyes, the mistress is working non-stop. Her children were also taken back to live at her parents' home, and after years of her neglect, they are now receiving strict discipline from their grandparents. It's tough for the kids right now, but reforming their behavior at this point is likely in their best interest for the future. Meanwhile, my ex-husband, left alone, is still living by himself in that rundown house. Although he managed to pay the damages, he couldn't afford the repairs for the house, and, astonishingly, it's recently started leaking from the ceiling while the windows remain broken. Even if he wanted to sell, the house, now dilapidated, is hardly worth anything, and selling the land it's on wouldn't cover the remaining mortgage. In desperation, the ex-husband contacted our son, explained his current plight, and begged him to mediate between us. However, having seen my struggles up close, our son, who now despises his father, he coldly dismissed him with a firm never contact me again. Rejected by his mistress and now by his son, my ex-husband was reportedly so shocked that he's been bedridden. Having secured the damages, I decided to use this opportunity to buy a condominium. I purchased a new condo in a convenient location near the station, which I can leave to my son if anything happens to me, and perhaps rent out later for additional income. After moving, my son often visits, and we enjoy meals together, just the two of us. He's doing well at his new job and absolutely loves his work. As for me, my career as a tutor at the learning center is going well, and I've even been approached about a promotion to become the head of the center, which seems likely to bring even more fulfillment. Having formally severed ties with my ex-husband, I feel liberated from the shackles that once bound me. Now, with my newfound freedom, I savor happiness every day.